Stop sharing.
Yep. Coaches, welcome. We will make a start. Firstly, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Great opportunity to continue to connect and learn. I'm really looking forward to Dom's presentation tonight on leadership and communication and coaching, and then hopefully I can live up to the 17 other presentations that have happened so far, because they've been fantastic. Luckily, Jack Fleming is going to take the Q&A component, so very lucky that I can hand that over to him, and I'm looking forward to passing that on, because it's one of the things that's certainly fun, but it's a little bit of a challenge as well, navigating all those questions that come in. So firstly, I'll just introduce Dom. Obviously NBL 1 men's head coach at Knox, state coach for the last 3 years, 2 gold medals with the under 16 boys. But on top of that, very experienced in his day job as a teacher. I won't get the title exactly right, but he's in a deputy head of school role, management position, also as a Master of Educational Leadership and Management, and really looking forward to his presentation tonight. So Dom, I'll pass over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Reece, and thanks to Wyndham and Reece for setting this up. What a great forum it is, and thanks for having me on. We must be scraping the bottom of the barrel, mate, if we've ended up together here at the end of the pile. But that's it's good to know. We've exhausted all our options. Yeah, so I might just share my screen. Oh no, can't do that. Can I share my screen there? It says I've just been disabled, so I'll just.
Is it coming up or?
No, sorry. It says host disabled screen sharing. Apologies. So I'll just go through a couple of things in it about myself till we get to that point. So a bit of context for everyone. Talking a little bit about Gen Z ain't been all that bad. Gen Z being the generation of young athletes that we're working with predominantly at the moment. I think they're born from 95 to 2015. And before that would be a millennial. Any earlier than that, and I'm really excited about tonight. I was watching a presentation during the week from a guy by the name of Greg Mitchell, who's is a teaching guy, an education guy, and he was saying he suffers from a really serious issue, which is enthusiasm. So hopefully I can join with him in sharing some of the suffering from that enthusiasm. There you go. Let me just organise this for everyone. Don't have to look too much at my ugly mug. There we go. Beautiful. So hopefully I sort of replicate that from Greg Mitchell as well. And I just love talking about leadership and reading about leadership and about coaching and talking about coaching as well. And I think this is a great opportunity to be able to further that. What we're looking at tonight, these are the 5 questions really that I'd like to pose and try and explore a little bit, but not I guess a great deal of content to come through from me, more about posting questions and inspiring some thought from you on these prompts. And when you read I in those questions, don't read Dom Linossier, substitute your name into them. So what do X know about me? What do I know about me? What do I know about them being the people that we are leading or coaching? How can I translate them, and where can I look to for more? Talk about some resources at the end. So Reece has done a great job covering my intro, but a little bit about me. I've been a teacher for 10 years. I've been fortunate to teach at the same school for the past 10 years. Haileybury is quite a large independent school in Melbourne. Held leadership positions across curriculum and pastoral in most areas of the school from grade 5 through to year 12. In 2017, I was selected or appointed to the position of head of middle school at City Campus. So was part of a pretty exciting initiative to be a founding member of an executive on a new site. And there's a real challenge in that, in establishing what it means to be a member of a community that is much larger than just what our City Campus was, quite a small campus at the time. And then something, of course, pretty unique too. My current role is in the middle school. So that's grades 5 through to 8 boys, predominantly look after them, and also the senior deputy head of campus at the City Campus. And as Reece said, studying my Masters in Educational Leadership and Management. And don't hold it against me, but I've been coaching at Knox since 2007. And I coached every junior age group, under 12s through to under 20s, across boys and girls. And I noticed that Dave Ingham's in the audience tonight, and I was appointed NBL 1 head coach for the season that never was in 2020. And I'll just make this as part of my pitch to be reappointed for 2021 with a 0-0 record. At least I haven't lost a game in NBL 1 yet. It's a positive from that frame. So a little bit about that, and just in a warning sense, none of this is my own effectively. All of this is repurposed from somewhere else. Please take it with a grain of salt. Please apply it through your own filter of your understanding, your own self-awareness, your own skills and interests. I certainly do not have all of the answers, and I think that's a really important thing to make a point of at the start. I think vulnerability and openness are important parts of leading. I think they're important parts of presenting too. But I think that's an important part here, is that I would hope that this inspires a few more questions than it does give answers for you. And tonight won't necessarily be talking about the characteristics of leadership or as leaders as such. Pick on a couple of different components of that. But this next quote kind of really launches into, I think, an important part about what leadership is and where we're going to head to tonight. So historically, the leader was a person who knew the most, and that was the basis of their authority. Leaders today still have to understand their business, but it's unrealistic and ill-advised to expect a leader to have all of the answers. Organizations are simply too complex for leaders to govern on that basis. And I think that's a really important part about people who are going into coaching, people who are stepping up in their coaching journey. So if you're stepping up from being a domestic coach to being a rep coach, and being a 12-5s coach to being a 12-1s coach, and then stepping in from juniors to seniors or juniors to state team or whatever it may be, you cannot pretend that you know everything, and your organization does not expect you to know everything. I think they're two really important points about leadership. And if any organization does expect you to know everything, then you're probably in the wrong place. I would suggest they're suffering maybe from some poor leadership themselves. I think it's about leadership is about growth. It is about the three sort of key characteristics of being able to ask, being able to listen, and being able to empathize with those that you are with. So they're the big three themes we'll keep coming back to: being able to ask, being able to listen, and being able to empathize. And listening as distinct from hearing. I think they're two different skills in itself. But yeah, my biggest piece of advice, I think maybe one of the only pieces of advice that I will offer, is that don't go into anything expecting to have all of the answers. And if you do think that you do have all of the answers, then it's probably not the right position for you to be going into. You need to be striving for something a little bit more. So our first three prompts that we're going to consider is what does it mean to lead? What do I know about me, and what do I know about them? I don't really mean to sort of paint a picture of me versus them, as in like the leader as distinct from the follower. But I think it's an important one when we're coaching to consider that the coach versus the athlete are two very distinct roles. And if they're not distinct roles, then you probably need to draw some lines somewhere, I think, along that point as well. This is a quote from Brené Brown on the left. I'm sure most of you or some of you will have heard of Brené Brown. She's a fantastic writer in concepts of values and leadership. She has a big push on vulnerability and what that means, and vulnerability from a position of strength, forming a position of strength as opposed to anything else. So just if you might want to use the chat here, I know Flemmo is moderating the chat, so let's make his life a little bit difficult. Just pop into the chat there. A word, one phrase, could be a characteristic, could be a person, could be a verb or something along those lines about leadership. Like, when you hear the word leadership, what do you hear? So just pop that in the chat there. Post it to everyone if you can. And we might just kind of use that as a bit of a way to tick off some things. So yeah, to be an example, strength is a really interesting concept. We might talk a little bit about strength of values a little bit later on. Inspirational, absolutely. Communication, we'll talk about that later on, Jackie. Full marks to you. Humility, really interesting concept, absolutely. Mediation, yeah, that's tough. Mentoring, absolutely. So there's some great concepts there. Keep them coming as we go. If there's something that prompts some thinking from you about that, then pop it in the chat and we can come back to it a little bit later on. The one thing that I will say about leadership, clear as day, and everything else is probably up for contestation except for this one, is that leadership is about change. If something's not changing, then you're not leading, or somebody isn't leading. And that leadership can only be about what that change is. There has to be a difference from point A to point B. There has to be a process that's followed. And that process, I would suggest, needs to be guided by good intentions for positive outcomes. And that is what we're going to define leadership as. There's been some, I guess, contestation around, you could talk about historically kind of different leaders. You would look, some people, there's been a bit of a conversation around people who are leaders who have led to bad results or bad outcomes, or outcomes that we wouldn't see as positive throughout history. And I don't think that we are, for me, I'm not considering them leaders in that sense, because I don't think they had good intentions and positive outcomes. Of course, that's up for personal interpretation, but that's kind of my stance on things. The positive outcomes is not necessarily the part, so without positive outcomes, growth, the leadership that's kind of the leadership we're not going to look to explore. And the reason that I'm going to talk about leadership in that way is because a big part of what I suggest leadership, or characteristic of leadership, is moral compass, having a moral compass, and you're letting that guide you. We'll talk clearly about clear values and direction in a second. Michael Fullan is a great educator around leadership. He's written a whole series of books. His latest is called Nuance. I was fortunate to go to a professional development session with Michael earlier in the year, pre-COVID-19. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but there actually was a pre-COVID-19 year, 2020. He has 9 steps in his change process that he's identified. And the number one step, which I think is a really important one, is that in leadership, you need to make sure that you are right at the end of the meeting, not at the start of the meeting. If you are right at the end of the meeting, then your group, the decisions, the discussions, the analysis that's gone on in your conversation as a leader has got to a point where you feel comfortable with that discussion moving forward with. I think that's an important process too. And then the last component of this can be really hard. Fullan also talks about leadership in the middle. So there's often going to be someone that you are reporting to, and there's often going to be people that report to you. So if you are a middle leader in any sort, it could be a type at school or in your workplace. It could be from a coaching perspective. If you're a 12-1s coach, for instance, you may have some ownership or some leadership of the under 12s program as a collective, and then you're also reporting to a director of coaching. So that kind of middle leadership, what Fullan argues is that you should exploit up, you should liberate down, and you should lateralize everywhere. Exploit up, liberate down, lateralize everywhere. What he means by that is use the limitations or the guidance that you get given from those above you and exploit the opportunities that presents. See it as a good thing. Then you should liberate those who report to you from any limitations that you're feeling from your manager above you or your leader above you. And then you should lateralize everywhere. Now, of course, leadership is not necessarily about management, and leadership isn't necessarily about, you can lead up, absolutely a case, but Fullan argues that really you should be exploiting up. You should be exploiting the system as best as you possibly can to get the outcomes that you're after. I really like that concept. A, because it's empowering to a middle leader, which is quite a nice position, I think, for middle leaders to be in. But B, because I think there's there's often a negative connotation to exploit. It seems like you're taking advantage of, but I think taking advantage is exactly what leadership is about. Now, leadership versus management, this can be a bit of a mismatch in there. So leadership what is leadership? It's setting direction, it's aligning people, it's motivating others, it's initiating change. And management is then the core part of that, which is planning and budgeting, organization, problem solving, and providing predictability. Realistically, you need to do both. You can't be a good leader without management. And I think that's a really important thing, is that don't try and make too much of a distinction between what it is to be a leader versus a manager. But I think the skill set of leading is different to managing. I think that's the important distinction to make. So what does leadership actually look like in hoops? Well, where do we want to get to? There should be multiple endpoints in every season. So every athlete wants a different direction. The team wants a different direction. The organization wants a different direction. So in an NBL 1 sense, my guy's Dylan Stith. He wants to make sure that in theory, at the end of the 2020 NBL 1 season, he's in a position to be able to push for a roster spot on an NBL roster. At the same time, as a team, we want collective success. So we want to make sure that we have a successful season. I think discussion about success and what it looks like is for another time, but that'll be relative to your purpose. And then what does your organization expect? So then the expectation of Knox basketball for me in 2020 and for our NBL 1 program was we want to have a successful program in terms of development of junior athletes, but in terms of individual development of each player. Every player should lead our program better than where they came into, and we will have success if that's the case. So where do we want to get to is difficult because it requires backwards planning in multiple directions. I think if you had listened to Flemo's talk last week around needs-based coaching, it probably reflects a similar kind of concept, a rephrasing of that kind of concept. You've got Kennedy Karima and his defense-first mentality around what it takes and backwards planning from there. You've got Liam Flynn and his focus on skill development to achieve and capacity. I think it can take any different type of form. It's about you and reflection of you and understanding of your athletes that you're leading or people that you're leading. What is our capacity to be able to get to where we want to get to? What are our skills, interests, and motivations to reach that point? So as a coach or as a leader, I'm saying, here's the team. This is where we would like to get to. The we is a collective. All right, now every athlete in there, what are my skills, interests, and motivations to be able to help that athlete? How does that then apply to the next athlete? How does it apply to the collective? How does it apply to my organization as a whole? So I think skills, interests, and motivations is the capacity you have to be able to reach that point. Motivations is a really interesting concept, what people are motivated by and when they're motivated to be able to act on things or to achieve a purpose. And I think for every team that you have a Johnny or a Jane that's only interested in Johnny and Jane's endpoint, there is absolutely a way to break down that communication and get to it. We'll get to that in a second towards the end. But that's on the coach or on the leader to be able to figure that out, especially when we're talking junior hoops, when these young people often don't have the skill capacity to be able to have those conversations, to understand that. And that's the whole reason that we lead or the whole reason that we coach as part of our purpose. And then how do we harness this capacity to get there? So what is our process and do we have adaptive strengths? In NBL 1 2020, Liam Parkinson was going to be an assistant of mine. Parko's ability to think analytically is so much further developed than mine that it's like, okay, he's a great assistant for me. When was going through the process of selecting assistant coaches for the state team last year, Flemo came around for the second time, but Flemo and I think similarly on some parts and totally differently in other ways. And I think that's a really important component to get to. And then we had Nick Mihai was our other assistant. And for anyone that knows Mihai, that was going off in a third direction. Absolutely. And he's not here to defend himself. So that's okay. We'll just let that fly there. So it's really important that that you think about the collective capacity. So when you lead, you are leading, but other people in your team are able to lead at different points. And if you can empower them to get there, then that's a really positive reflection on what leadership is and how to lead. So this is what the first working definition of what leadership requires. It requires a clear vision, which reflects clearly defined values and principles, which are articulated clearly. I don't think I could put clearly in there any more often. I probably should have proofread this a little better than what I have. Clear vision, clearly defined values and principles, which are articulated clearly. Articulation comes into communication. We'll talk about that later. But how we get to clear vision and how we get to values and principles, I think is a really important part. This is the knowledge of self, which is really, you have to be really hyper aware of self in order to lead others. So I'm really fortunate in my master's to be studying under the David Gurr and Laurie Drysdale. They're two academics who have worked a lot in the leadership field, specifically in education. But they have a model. Now I've kind of moved over some language over here. This is student outcomes from them in the middle, and then this is another kind of group here. I'll move that teaching and learning in that space. So I've just kind of substituted athlete over student and coaching into teaching and learning. I'm not going to try and claim this model at all. Please note the work of Gurr and Drysdale down there. But as as leaders, athlete outcomes then are influenced by all of these like next layer of circles. They're the 7 characteristics Gurr and Drysdale talk about. And then from that, they've broken them down into a little bit more broader what that means. And so this really, we're going to focus on a little bit of 2 areas. We're going to focus on one area really. We're talking about leading self tonight. That's really what we're going to hone in on. But coaching really is about these kind of components: product knowledge, evidence-based, disruptive, and the use of technology. And then how does technology disrupt your coaching? And then how do you utilize that disruption in your coaching as well? So I'm going to talk about leading of self Really important. I think that's a really great place to start. And it's probably, to be perfectly honest, one of the things that is going to really help direct the others, developing an organization, understanding your context, setting direction, all of those kind of ideas. So I actually wrote an article on this about understanding of self. And it is the only article in my Medium collection at the moment. So if you were to follow me on Medium, then you probably have a very short read. But the idea being about the ABCs of understanding self. So you have to understand attitudes, how you wish for those in and those influenced by your program or by your leadership to think. So what are the attitudes? What attitudes are you going to use to influence those who are members of your program? Okay. And then what are the attitudes that those people are going to carry outward as well? So not only are they internal, but they're also externally facing. It's a really important part of leadership as well to think about both internally facing and externally facing components of what your leadership looks like. So internal referring to your team and the interaction between your team, and then external, your team interacting with everybody else. Behaviors, so what does it look like? What do the attitudes actually look like? How do they manifest in the real world? Character. Ask the tough questions about the character traits exhibited away from the program. Character really is a hard one to measure or discuss in that space, because it is about others' perceptions of those within your leadership or under your leadership. And so I think that character, talk about the kind of concept of a campaign slogan from a politicking campaign. You might have, like Bernie Sanders, for instance, "Feel the burn" on the front of the t-shirt. All right. And then really what it is you think about that as you walk into the room, what your character is the words that others would associate with you as you walk out the room. What do they see on your back? So you've come through, you've had your interaction, you've had your moment, you've had your event, you leave the room. What is the character of that person who leaves? That's the words that go on the back of their t-shirt. And then S is for summary. So find a succinct way to facilitate clarity for those involved in your team about your A, Bs and your Cs. And then you have to go and live it, which is just like a small challenge to be able to build from there. I think that's a really interesting way to think about leadership. I think it gives a bit of clarity. What are your attitudes? What are your behaviors? What do your attitudes look like? And then character. What would others say about your behaviors in that space? Skills, interests, and motivations. These are like filters through which you have to view leadership, and you have to understand your skills, your interests, and your motivations. If you can understand and be genuine about them, then it becomes possible to lead others to discover their skills, interests, and motivations. But if you don't have genuine reflection on the reason why you're leading, or how you're leading, and what your capacity is, then it becomes really tough to lead others in that same way, because that is what you would expect or what you would hope from your team. Part of it is about accurate and aware reflection and understanding of self. You have to be able to look in that mirror and know exactly what is looking back at you. And without the skill to be able to do this, without the capacity, without working at this, without crafting this, you can't develop a vision that's underpinned by values and principles that you will be able to remain true to. Everyone can throw a word on a t-shirt, everyone can throw a word on a wall, but not everyone can live that word in their character and have others to talk about that as part of their character. And I think that's a really important difference between things. You will have seen that clip of the college coaches. We're coming in, we're changing our culture, we're changing this. This is all about culture. This is about, we're going to play fast and we're going to have a great culture. Culture is a word that in successful programs isn't necessarily uttered. I don't think you're going to find Nick Saban talking about culture of Alabama football, because the culture is the everyday. It's about how you live and breathe those attitudes. It is in your behaviors, and it's reflected in your character. And Neil Danaher has a great saying with this. He has, you have to hold yourself and your assumptions about yourself up to the Bunsen burner. Really important. Hold yourself and your assumptions about yourself up to a Bunsen burner. Anybody that's read his book, When All Is Said and Done, if you haven't read it, it's on my suggested reading, I think, at the end. But if it's not there on that final slide, it should be. It's a great text. So then, to re-articulate what we spoke about earlier, leadership requires a clear vision, which reflects clearly defined values and principles, which are articulated clearly and is adapted with an understanding of the context in which you lead. So an awareness of your context is the last framework, I think. That's really important. You have to adapt. I can't teach or manage or lead a team in school in the same way that I coach my NBL1 men for a whole raft of different reasons, but predominantly because it's a different context. And I have to be able to adjust to that context. And any leader has to be able to do that. And successful navigation of that's really hard. So there are a couple of quite successful leaders that are sort of people that inspire me or have had something to do in terms of my development of leadership and my understanding of leadership. Urban Meyer is one of them, former college football coach. He when he was at Ohio State, he wrote a book, Above the Line, another great read for those who like it, like reading about sport and sport leadership in different ways. And he talks about a leadership structure that really sits into what we kind of would categorize as distributed leadership, the concept that all members of the team lead in some way, shape, or form. Distributed leadership is tough. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not as, I wish it was as simple as being able to give everybody a position of responsibility or a title and say, like, off you go, this is now distributed leadership. Distributed leadership is really, like, I think how Urban has described it, or how he built his culture at Ohio State is really a prime example of it. So he talks about the unit leaders. So you educate the unit leaders, and they in turn educate their units. Everybody embodies the core values, and you have to really importantly invest in relationships. It goes back to that core skill of empathy and what it means to be empathetic in terms of leading. And empathy is not necessarily always being able to please everyone. If you're trying to please everyone, you won't lead anyone. But empathy is about the concept of being able to find a way in which you can communicate an understanding of context to others, and then be able to apply that and still lead or make the tough decisions as you need to. So people will be prepared to follow you. People will be prepared to follow you if you are empathetic, even if they don't necessarily, if it's not necessarily best for them, the way in which they do things. So he sees leading, or what he says is culture, but I've kind of abbreviated, or not abbreviated, I've reappropriated it to a concept of leadership and the way in which he talks about it. You have to behave it. So what behaviors are essential, what beliefs are essential in terms of to derive or sustain the behaviors. So this is believe it, sorry, not behave it. And examine yourself. Does your behavior embody these? You have to sell it. It has to be clearly defined. You have to be able to show it to others and pitch it to others. It is not, now, this is where I think I would differ a little bit from Urban Meyer. He talks about this is not a debate. That you as a leader established a foundation for success. That's a very like great man or great person kind of concept of leadership. It flies in some capacity. It doesn't necessarily fly in every capacity or every context. I think it's important to understand that, but you could most readily see how that would apply to a college football program such as Ohio State. And then you have to demand it. This part I think is non-negotiable. Everybody has to be accountable to the culture. It's a requirement, or accountable to the expectations. It's a requirement. The culture is the only acceptable means of performance. So when you lead, if you can hold people to account, then you're in a really great position to be in, and you don't get the culture you want, you get the culture that you build. So therefore, I think that's reflective of leadership. You don't get people that you lead to buy into what you're articulating unless you actually live it. 3 more quick examples for you here. The first one is Sir Dave Brailsford, British cycling legend. He revolutionized British cycling. He's the guy behind the 1%. Just do little things 1% better. He had what they called the podium principles. I really like the concept of the podium principles and the way in which he's articulated it, more than I think actually relating to anything basketball. Talks about strategy, human performance, behavioral psychology, and continual performance. The next one in the middle there is the late great Pat Summitt, Tennessee Lady Vols legend. And one of her quotes that rings true, I think, with this is the willingness to experiment with change may be the most essential ingredient to success at anything. Experiment with change may be the most essential ingredient to success at anything. I think if anybody could probably talk about success in basketball coaching, Pat Summitt would have been one of them. And the last guy is a guy in the book, Gridiron Genius. Michael Lombardi talks about Doug Peterson, when he was appointed head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, being somebody that he thought had no chance of being successful as a head coach in the NFL. And he very publicly sort of rescinds his words around this. And watching the All or Nothing series, it's available on Amazon Prime, the Philadelphia Eagles component, there's something that continues to appear behind Peterson when he's talking, and that is, what will you do to nourish our values this week? I love that concept of nourish the values. Again, another way in which a great leader is articulating where they're headed and what they would like. So what are you going to do to nourish them? I love that concept of nourish. There's something community-based about coming together around food. There's something powerful about the ability to sit around a dinner table and have communication with one another in that sense. You've got those great stories of Greg Popovich and his ability to kind of bring people together around a dinner table and a bottle of wine that'll be too expensive for me at any position at any point in time. But he talks about that being a really important part of who he is and his coaching tree. I really like that concept from Doug Peterson as well. So I feel horrific after putting my photo up after those four great leaders, but we'll go with it. Just noticed a little appearance from Shorty there as well on the side. Nice work. So this is my coaching philosophy, and this I think applies to my coaching philosophy, and I like to think that it applies to my leadership in different ways as well. So comes from a great mentor of mine in the school setting. She's our current senior vice principal. And she is a fantastic leader in the way in which she leads people and empowers people. But the concept is to nudge. So to just shift the limits slightly in the direction that you think is really important. Very Brailsford, I guess, in that sense too. 1% in one direction. Just nudge, change the status quo, challenge the status quo. So then this principles or these kind of ideas, this has come through our NBL 1 season, or pre-season. So this is part of our defining about who we are as a group. So we are opportunistically disciplined. That means that we know when our chances to go are, and that we have discipline behind those decision-making processes about when to go and when not to go and whatever it may be. Our guiding principles are me for we, clarity, and to be unrelenting. And in gameplay, what is this reflected in? What's reflected through pace through the ball, space is a premium, and assertive decisions. I won't get too much into kind of the X's and O's component of it, but I think the whole concept is, and in 2021, hopefully I get reappointed, but in 2021, when that season comes around, and you come and watch the Knox Raiders men play in NBL 1, hopefully you see, I guess, a challenge to what is the status quo in some way, shape, or form, whether that be off the court in terms of our preparation and you don't get to see it in terms of the ball zipping around in different ways, or whether that be how we do scout or how we defend, or whether it is an X's and O's concept too. And the last thing that I'll talk about in terms of the leadership component is about feedback. If you only see the blue, if you only see the thumbs up that you're heading in the right direction, you will absolutely stagnate and you will no longer be leading at that point in time. Leadership is always going to have some red thumbs down. They're always going to be there. There should be someone who disagrees with you, and there should be someone who disagrees with you on principles and on purpose. And that's valuable disagreement, because then that'll allow you to have a valuable discussion to be able to think about how you can move forward. Black Box Thinking is a book that I'm reading at the moment, and it talks about autopsy of failure. So what are you going to do when something fails? How do you autopsy that failure, and how do you review it? It does a great comparison study between aeronautical systems of analyzing failure in aeroplanes and looking at the medical industry and what happens with doctors and surgeons when they analyze failures, or as the book asserts, not necessarily to the same degree. But are we looking at systems that need to change? Are we looking at broader concepts? Are we looking at adjustments through conversation? And then what you are looking for in terms of your feedback will be what you see, the concept of confirmation bias. You need to go outside of your immediate circle. At the moment on my social media, I'm seeing a lot of stuff around, I guess, concepts and beliefs or things that I've interacted with. Whether or not I necessarily agree with them is different, but I'm seeing a lot of kind of concepts around the same kind of idea. Being a politics teacher, I see a lot of stuff about, what's happening in the US. There's a lot of commentary around leaders in the world at the moment, and lots of the stuff that gets reflected in that. And so I think that there's a component of us that has to be aware of where we seek feedback from. It has to be valuable, and it has to be somebody whose opinion we value, not because they agree with us, but because we know that they're going to give it to us exactly how they see fit. I think this goes into Al's conversation from last week about mentoring as well, and the importance of what a great mentor is. Perfect. So then the next component of where we're at is how do I translate me to them, or the people that I'm leading with or alongside. I think communication is a skill set of mine. I say that with like bated breath now as I go into a presentation about communication and deliver this online into your living rooms everywhere. But I think this has been a skill set of mine through my years as a coach and through my years as a teacher. And definitely something that I have not always done well. I still remember I was coaching the 12-2s at Knox, and we were doing a defensive transition drill, and this kid Liam could just not get this right. And no matter, I've explained it to him, and then repeated my exact same explanation again, and then repeated my exact same explanation again, and Liam didn't get it, couldn't understand it, and I lost my mind at that point in time. I'm very proud to say this is a long time ago, so not necessarily the same coach now, but at that point in time, it was then a reflection that, like, okay, why didn't Liam understand? That's not on Liam, right? Liam is not the one that is leading in this point in time. Dom is the one that is leading, and Dom is the one that needs to adapt his message and translate his message so that Liam can understand. I didn't see it at the time. I only saw it in the post, and thankfully was able to salvage that kind of interaction later on down the track. But I think it's an important thing to do is that you will have failures, and that's totally okay. And it should be embraced and encouraged by your organization. I was fortunate to have a great DOC at the time who worked with me on how I could change things and communicate things. So a bit of a shortcut for me in this space. I know I'm kind of getting partly towards the end of my time, but these are the 3 C's for me of communication. I think they're really important. Last week, Flemo spoke about the attention span being limited or it being really valuable. I think, in essence, in basketball, in a coaching setting, you should be working in 8 to 12 minute blocks, and you should have a 20%, 80% split of instruction to repetition. So work from 8 to 12 minutes every time on something, and you should have 20% of that time is instruction and 80% of that time is repetition. If that is to be the case, your language needs to be condensed because you don't have time to be explaining everything. So you need to do some pre-learning, and you need to do some preloading with athletes. Retrieval from long-term memory to action and short-term memory is really, it's a tough connection to make. It doesn't happen quickly for everyone. There are probably ever more students that we work with that have working memory concerns or working memory ideas that they're working through. And so to be able to adapt and assist them in the way in which we communicate is really important. I'm sure that's the same for our athletes. And we can speed that up with prompts. And make sure that, I think the big thing for me is that memory is associated with our senses. So tap into those senses where you can, right? So utilize those senses and utilize things like humor and joy to tap in, because students or athletes will be able to remember that and be able to build from that. So your language should be common. If you don't have a glossary, write one. In itself, it'll help you understand what language and phrasing you want to use and when you want to use it. Athletes will have different languages from different coaches, so you need to be able to get them on the same page really quickly. It's a really important part of coaching. Part of this may be influenced by your club or organization. You may have your club that says, we're going to call the low help guy or low help defender, we're going to call that the captain, or we're going to call it the rover, or whatever we're going to call it. You're going to call the top, the high part of the eye and the help place, going to call that the nail. So your club may give you a structure to be able to build from. I think you should use that and really become familiar with it and write a glossary. Absolutely a great process to go through for yourself, if nobody else. Athletes can then participate in the editing process. So it is their language after all. They're the ones who have to use it and understand it. So they may as well be a part of that process. To each degree, of course, that will change based on what team you're coaching and their level of understanding and ability and all that kind of jazz. I think this is a really important part, that this leads to a shared understanding of what success criteria looks like. So in 2019 at Vic Metro, we started a new thing where at the start of the session, we would give them the points of emphasis, and then the athletes had 2 minutes to decide what the success criteria were. So if our points of emphasis were post-passing, let's say one of them was post-passing, then we may say, okay, you've got 3 minutes. You have to come up with what the success criteria for post-passing looks like. they had a chat and they come back to us and say, all right, these are the 3 things that are our success criteria for that category. So then beautiful. Then we know that either they're on the same page as us and where we'd like them to be, fantastic. Or as is often the case early in the piece, oh my gosh, we've got some work to do in terms of redefining what it means to be a good post passer. And then we can adjust from there and sort of help instruct from there. So I think there's something really important there. And I think building, again, I would really encourage coaches who are here to go and listen to Flemo's chat last week about the rule of 3. I think that provides a great framework to be able to build into how that kind of translates around success criteria. Be concise, probably the exact opposite of what I've been this evening. Starts with more broader, more in-depth definitions and then move to an acronym from there. So last year we used HHLH, high hands, low hips, to describe our closeouts. And we had KOTB, keep the ball outside the box, keep outside the box. And we could just write them on the whiteboard pre-game and the kids all knew exactly what that meant. We didn't have to talk them through how to close out. We didn't have to talk them through what the D principles were. It was concise and it works for them. If they can send it in a Snapchat, it's an appropriate length. If it takes any more than a Snapchat length, you've gone way too long. And clear is the last one. I would suggest that you make your language verb-based. Make them about the action that comes from the prompt as opposed to anything else and focus only on what is necessary. So this is an example of the glossary. These are parts of the glossary that we had for the NBL 1 this year. When Reece makes the presentation available, I'll make sure that on the PowerPoint is our full glossary. You can have all of the terms that you would like there, but this is be redefined and reworked as you go. You can, of course, you're welcome to take anything that you like from this and explore it with your own group. But remember that the language has to be yours. It can't be somebody else's. So I've pinched parts of this from lots of different people and pulled it together and then repurposed it a little bit for myself. And I think you would need to do the same, should you like to. The last couple of things I'm going to focus on. Recommended reading. If there is one book that I recommend that you read between now and the end of time, it is The Resilience Project, Finding Happiness Through Gratitude, Empathy and Mindfulness. That book has had a hugely positive influence on myself and is one of those books that I carry around spare copies to be able to give out to people as I walk by them or engage with them. The other books on the side there are really great reads. Also, Every Moment Matters is an essential read for any junior coach, I think, in terms of their thinking. Range, a great book. Good to Great from Jim Collins is a little dry potentially, but it's a great business leaders book. Above the Line, Urban Meyer. Highly recommend the audio book of Above the Line. It's great to hear some emotion, especially in the stories that he talks about. Where to look for a little bit more. I think there's some great stuff out there. Check out on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, get on it. Although I would imagine that many of you are, seeing as that's probably where you've seen the promotion for these sessions. These are some great podcasts. There is a great resource, the Basketball Australia Coaches Resource. There's some fantastic articles in there. I drew on a couple of them to inspire some conversation around the 3 C's of communication I've been through earlier. Make sure you go and check them out as well too. So last thing from me is a little bit of summary. That's where you can find me. You can find me at @dlinoss on Twitter and socials. That's my email there, dom.linossier@knoxbasketball.com.au. So please feel free to reach out and have a further conversation or chat about anything you like. Doesn't even have to be leadership or hoops related. Happy to chat about everything, including my the Melbourne Demons and how great they're going to be in season 2020 or whatever season it is. But this is really what tonight has been about. So leadership is about enacting positive change, well-intended positive change. You have to understand yourself first before you can lead anybody else. You have to have a clear sense of direction where you're going that's being guided by your values and your principles. Communication is about having a common language that is concise and is clear for everybody to understand, and read and develop your practice. Invest in mentoring. Take the time to curate mentors and mentor relationships. They're really, really worthwhile. So thanks very much for your time again. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. Hopefully there's something of merit for you there. And on that note, I might throw to what is going to make me the most nervous tonight is to throw to Flemo for a bit of Q&A.
Thank you, mate. Excellent presentation. Just give me the thumbs up. You can hear me, right? Beautiful. I was fortunate enough to work really closely with Dom, 2 years officially and 1 year unofficially. And all of those parts of that presentation are real and he brings to life in the way that he leads. So on behalf of the coaches, Dom, excellent job and so much value for them. Got a few questions that we'll work through. your coaching experiences through men and women, seniors and juniors to some capacity, would probably put you in the category of a generalist, as well as your teaching experiences. How do you think that that variety of coaching and teaching experiences has benefited your leadership?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I would like to consider myself a generalist, and I think in that sense, there's a natural curiosity that comes about through those experiences, and it's about the opportunity or pursuing an opportunity. So I think that everyone, if you're coaching juniors, there is no reason for you to be to try and to think about yourself as I'm a boys coach or a girls coach. If you think you're a great communicator, go and coach junior girls, and you'll very quickly find yourself in hot water and trying to sort of figure out how to communicate a little more clearly. Yeah, I think the concept of curiosity, Flemmo, is probably the one that guides me the most through that generalist kind of idea, and just trying to investigate a little bit more about everything and understand things. And I think it allows you to be a little bit more relatable to a broader variety. I think too, if you're a generalist, or if you have an appreciation or look more broadly than just your areas of confirmation bias, then you get a chance to question what you believe in and why you believe it. And you get a chance for other people to be able to question what you believe in and why you believe it. And I think that allows for some really great mentoring conversations and ideas around that as well. I think that the other part is that people can be nervous about sharing or don't necessarily want to share because you don't want to seem as though you have the answers. I think there's a really important component there. If you don't share, then you don't have the opportunity to receive feedback, and then you don't have the opportunity to grow. And so, yeah, I think that's an important part in that too. Hopefully that answers.
Excellent, mate. To all coaches out there, that book Range by David Epstein will give you plenty of context around generalists as well. Mm-hmm. From our friend Reece Potter, you could often be seen as somebody who's had some leadership experiences as a fairly young person in some capacity, and you talked about one of your sort of strengths being communication. Are there any other attributes or traits that you consider have helped you to be seen as a leader, as a younger coach or teacher?
I think I've been pretty fortunate to have some great role models and mentors along the way, and I think that you are a reflection of your experiences from other people. And I think when you're a young leader or a young head coach or whatever it may be, that you need to be able to lean on those people around you. I think Reece may have said it best. He may not know this, but it stuck with me from a couple of years ago. There was an interview with you, Reece, about coming into to your position at Werribee at the time. And it was about that you don't go in looking to enact change on day one. You go in with your ears open and you listen and you hear where people are at, and you get an understanding of what the system is when you go somewhere new, and then you get an opportunity to bring change or bring leadership at that point in time. And I think that that's something that's really kind of stuck with me too, is if you go in planning on making big bang changes at the start, there's a common joke in education that when a new principal gets appointed at anywhere, that they change the entrance. And that's the big sign of their leadership in their first year. And that should be the big sign of their leadership in the first year. It should be the new entrance, because it should be that they're listening to what things look like and what their status quo is a little bit before they start to understand and look to enact change. So I think that as a young person, and to lean on the expertise, whilst your team members may be vastly more experienced than you, there is a reason why you are in a position of leadership. Somebody has seen something or heard something or believes in you for that reason. You need to lean on those people around you to help support you. So leadership is not, what's the quote is around, we stand on the shoulders of the greats. The concept of that you have the ability to lean on those people around you and the expertise of your team to be able to help you lead, I think is a really important one as well.
Awesome, mate. We've got a question from Scott C. Not sure who he is, but he just wanted to know if you got your team or program, what might be one example of where you would start, whether it's on the court or off the court, just a quick sort of picture of that.
Thanks, Scotty. I think where I would start. I think the very first thing you need to do is call and have a conversation with every single member of your team. I think that's the best place to start because that'll give you the goalposts. So if you're in a junior capacity, then you've got tryouts. You need once you know pretty much where you're headed in that team selection, you are finding every chance to sit down next to that kid on the bench and have a conversation with them in the middle of the scrimmage. Or, at state trials, we would very much be walking around the court and listening to how the players are interacting with one another, because that's going to give you really good information about how they see themselves and where they sit. So I think conversations is the best point. And if you're looking for an X's and O's thing, I'm going to start with offense, because if you score more points than somebody else, you win. And I think that there was a mentor of mine who told me that a long time ago.
Great answer. A question from Clayton. What are your thoughts on coaches being friends with players on social media?
Yeah, thanks, Clayton. It's a very clear-cut thing for me. That's a strong no. And the reason for that is a professional reason more than anything else, especially in the junior setting. So that's part of, I guess, my professional practice as a teacher. I think it very much depends on your relationship to that athlete. If you're talking about seniors, then I think you have to be very careful around where that lies as well. But you have to make a judgment call based on the relationship that exists with that athlete. And I think that, for me, it's been a strong no. I think there's a difference between social media and them having your number and being able to text or call or something along those lines. I think that's very open lines of communication. I don't think there's necessarily a need for social media in that space, especially with junior athletes. And I think it's probably just a water too murky for me, I think, in that way. But of course, just best judgment is where you can go with it. I think it's probably best practice to steer clear, but that's just my personal status and based on my professional kind of requirements.
Great. Just a few questions put into one about your own self-reflective practice or how you seek feedback. Is there any things that you do as a routine after games or just consistently to make sure that your self-awareness is at a high level?
So post game in immediacy, just 5 minutes with my assistant coach for a long time, Justin Ava, and we'd sit there and just have a chat about where we think things were at, and write some notes on my coaching whiteboard, take a photo of that, and stick that's on my phone then for me to be able to go back to when I'm planning practice the next time or having the next conversation that needs to be. I would suggest that in the 5 minutes after the game, in a bit of clear headspace is a great time to get some immediate thoughts down, and that you need to come back to them before you get to practice at another point in time. Just find yourself another 5 minutes, whether it be over a coffee on a Sunday morning or whatever it may be when you're planning your session for the next week. I think reflection is much bigger practice than that, though. I don't think you can reflect on 5 minutes on a Friday night and be a good reflector. I think it takes practice. A big fan of journaling. So the first thing that I do every morning is get to my desk at work, open my journal, and I write what I call my morning manifesto. And it's just a series of affirmation statements for myself about if I know what's coming up that day, if I've got a tough conversation to have, that I am prepared, that I've done the work to be able to have that conversation. I give myself a guideline and then talk through what I'm thinking at that point in time. Where's my head at? Am I anxious about the day ahead? Am I feeling like there's something that's going to be really great for me in that day that I'm looking forward to? And if there's not, then what am I going to make sure that I really enjoy? And I think that 5 minutes at my desk really helps me think about my day in that way. I'd love to be able to do that at home. Although, to be perfectly honest, getting up that extra 15 minutes earlier, Flemmo, that's not on my to-do list. I'm not a 5 a.m. wake up. I like yourself, mate, with steak and eggs for breakfast at 5:17. But I think something along those lines. It takes practice. It's not easy. Don't be worried by your first reflection. You read over it and you think, God, that's a lot of tripe. Mine are often still tripe after a couple of years of doing this. But I think that you've got to get into regular practice about reflection in a more general sense. That'll help you reflect as a coach. Awesome,
mate. Just the last couple. How much of leadership do you think is born versus learned?
I think the people that you would put in as great men or great women leaders. They're people who have a natural predisposition potentially to their kind of environment in that sense, but I think it's context-based. If anybody's read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, it really hones in on the concept of it's about your context. You could have all of the gifts in the world. If you're in a poor context, you won't necessarily have an opportunity. I am a huge believer that it can be learned. You know, everyone looks at, let's take Martin Luther King. You look at Martin Luther King as a historical figure and you think, wow, man, that guy was a born leader, right? Like, you know, in that sense, he was born to a Baptist preacher who spent, you know, his weeks rehearsing and refining his public speaking, who passed it on to his son, who demonstrated those characteristics. He had time and to be able to refine and practice his delivery. So, like, there are parts and skills that can be learned, but your application of leadership has to come from within, and that only comes, I think, with practice as well. Reflection in that space.
Great answer, mate. Just the last one from our friend Billy. How do you balance the endpoints of the team versus the individual?
Yeah, with great difficulty and probably not overly successfully all the time is the short and succinct answer to that, Billy. I think if you're coaching a junior basketball team and your team goal is around winning, then you're not in the right space, I don't think. I think that makes it a bit easier. Your team goal has to be about individual pursuit and individual development of that athlete, and then their team collective understanding of what it means to be a basketball player and to love the game. I think if there's anything that, like, if a team's goal is to win a championship, well, there's one team that gets to win a championship every year. You know, that ain't easy. There are so many teams, you know, you're not in it to make up the numbers. Well, nobody's in it to make up the numbers, but with only one team being able to win it every year, it almost becomes like a fait accompli that you won't achieve that. So let's set some really achievable goals. I think, and really focusing on that individual players will help you get there. And don't try and do too much, I think, is the other part. Just probably the exact opposite of me taking 56 minutes and leaving Reece to 0 time in this presentation time at the end there. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Billy. Thanks very much. And thanks, Flemo. Great job.
Thank you, mate. So much to take from that. Coaches, if you have any more for Dom, just feel free to message him. But we better get on to Reece, because I'm sure he's getting nervous down at the Wyndham basketball stadium over there. So if you don't know Reece Potter, I'm not sure how you got here, but we'll start with Reece started in the town of Maitland. Don't know where that is, but apparently a little small town in New South Country. Moved his way down to Tassie to coach the SEABL women, the Launceston Tornadoes, at the young age of 22. Took him to a preliminary final. Made his way back up to New South Wales with the UC Caps and the Sydney Flames. And then found his way down to Melbourne to the lovely town of Wyndham. We've been fortunate enough for him to represent our Vic Metro women with the under-18 girls, a two-time gold medal head coach. Involvement with our under-15 women national team, I believe, in the Oceanias. And, of course, the player or basketball development manager down at Werribee Basketball. So really lucky to have you here, Reece. You've been the facilitator of these for many weeks in a row. So we're really looking forward to you sharing your knowledge. And I'll let you get stuck into it, mate.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, everyone. And just firstly, Dom, thanks for your presentation. It was awesome. I really loved it, mate. And, you know, I haven't had a whole lot to do with Dom, but just the little bits I've seen, I've really, you know, just liked the way he goes about it, and his communication's always stood out to me, and that's why I thought it was a great topic. You know, leadership and communication was great for him to talk about, and that certainly showed through. So thanks for that. Second thing, it looks like I'm out of a job. Flemo's taken my job, so he's taken over and then done a better job already. So, and then lastly, you guys are I'm now following the two most well-read coaches in Victoria, I think, and now you just got some guy from Maitland. So hopefully I can serve up something of value, but it may not be as well articulated as the last two guys, which were great. But I'll just get my PowerPoint up. if I can. What's going on here? Sorry. There we go. So just going to talk on finding your coaching pathway. I think it's something that's really interesting, and sort of my assistant coach, Corey, suggested it was something, because basically the only reason I'm up is a coach pulled out last week on Thursday, and sort of a few people have been asking me to do one, so I thought I'd better step up with that time. It sort of seemed like the right opportunity, and he sort of suggested this topic because it's a question I get a fair bit in my day job, and just talking to different coaches is, what should I do next? Where should I be looking to go? How do I get to the next level? And all those things. So going to just talk about that, and I'll get straight into it. So firstly, I'll touch on what my take on the Australian coaching pathway is, and importantly is not, just really briefly. Then Flemo's given an overview of my coaching roles, but I just want to touch on the journey and how I got to here, because that will help give a lot of context to the main part of the presentation, which is key ideas to find your pathway. But I'm going to do it sort of through my lens and what I've learned as a youngish coach, and hopefully it can give you some ideas and some thoughts and provoke some discussion. I'll just summarize really quickly, and then obviously we'll finish with the Q&A, and you can throw anything to us that you sort of pops up. So firstly, the Australian coaching pathway. I've got two graphics images there. The one on the left, so on my left here, the organizational structure, very rigid. CEO, head of department, senior manager, assistant manager, staff. This is a very rigid, clear, structured, organizational setup. There are some coaching structures that are like this. For example, US college system. Generally speaking, you go in as a grad assistant, work your way onto the bench as an assistant. You might work your way up second, first assistant, associate head coach, then head coach. There's generally a clear pathway for those coaches for how to get from A, B, C, D, and through. In my opinion, I don't see that as the Australian coaching pathway. I don't think it's clearly set or defined. It's fairly chaotic, and it's fairly random and all over the place, and very much less predictable. So I think there's opportunities in coaching, and there's a lot of opportunities, particular volunteer level, and small little bits of money here and there. But as far as full-time roles, it's pretty limited. There's some opportunities, but certainly no guarantees. And a lot of people see you when you get to this point in this image where you get to success. And a lot of people think you just went from here to here. But realistically, I think this is what the Australian coaching pathway looks like for people. It's up, down, all around. And that's why I put the point, your development and progression is not linear. As a coach, you're not just going to follow this straight up and get to where you want to be. And there's no, like I said, there's no set A, B, C, D, and you'll definitely get to where you want to get to. It's just not how it works in the Australian context, just with the way it's structured. And the last point I put here, and I got this from Mark Radford a few weeks ago, just on a phone call, you need to be ready to go down at some stage in the pathway, in the structure. And an example of that is if you get a state job as a state head coach, you're not going to be the state head coach forever. You're going to have to go back, and clubland is going to be your main thing. If you work in the NBL or WNBL, you might go back and be back at state level or whatever. You have to be ready to go up and down. And I just wanted to contextualize that at the start to understand that there really is no set or clearly defined pathway, because no coaching journey or pathway is the same. So some people go on as a pro or elite player, and they might get fast tracked because they've got that social and cultural capital to get them in the door. You might be a below average player. I was a very below average player, so I went into coaching very young. You might be a novice parent, a playing parent, young, old. There's all different ways you might get into it, and then there's all different levels and all different roles. And I've just got two photos in this slide. This first one here, right here, this is my old man. He was definitely a novice parent. He just started coaching at Maitland because they needed someone to help with the rep teams, and there wasn't enough coaches. in about 2003, 2004, got involved. And this photo is in 2014 at the Australian Under-18 Championships. And he's the head coach of the New South Wales country state team that won silver and lost to a very good Vic Metro team. But that was his coaching pathway, going from a novice, just working his way up through the system, and then getting opportunity at a pretty good level, obviously doing it all as a volunteer. But that's one example of a different coaching pathway. And then everyone obviously knows this guy, Andrew Gaze, probably the most recognisable or close to Australian basketballer of all time. His coaching pathway was different. Yes, he'd coached some juniors, mostly his own kids, but he pretty much went, without being an assistant coach at NBL level, straight into a head coaching job. And that's going to happen. There's going to be different things, and I think people have to understand that. It's not going to always be, straight lines and the same for everyone. There's no coaching journey or pathway is the same. So hopefully that just gives us a bit of grounding of where I'm going with it. If you logged into this thinking I was going to give you the answers exactly how to get to the job you want, it's probably not, but hopefully will provoke some thoughts. So I thought I'd just start with that. Really quickly, I just want to go through my coaching journey and how I got to where I was. And it might seem really simplified when you just talk through it, but it's hard to understand how many hours and different things go into stuff. But it was a fair bit of work. But I started off just as a rep coach. So I was playing under-18 Division 1 in Maitland, and Division 1 and Division 2 rep played on different weekends. And I coached the under-12 Division 2 boys my first year, my last year of playing under-18 juniors. It was my first year coaching 12-2 boys. We lost every single game that year. So it was a brutal year. What a way to get into it. But for some reason I liked it, and got told I was going to be a better coach than I was player, and so I stuck with it. And I did 6 years with Maitland as a rep coach. And similar to Dom, I did mostly boys to start with, but then I got involved in coaching girls, particularly around the state team. This guy down here, and it's a really bad photo of him because his head's cut off, but I didn't crop the photo. That's just how it was. Scott Balzer got me involved with the women's side through New South Wales country. And that's where I'd sort of had some different experiences. But I was the coaching director for the last little bit before I left. Heavily involved with the New South Wales high performance program under Mark Watkins predominantly. So I learned a lot through that. So at every camp I could get to, I was there. And it's in NITP, but also a lot of the other offshoots that they had. And like I said, 3 years with the state team, which was really good. And I was really lucky to be able to get heavily involved with that and lead things on court and lead scouts. And that really gave me a great opportunity. Involved as a lead coach for school. That was the only thing I got paid for to start with. Everything else was volunteer. And then I completed my level 1 and level 2 coaching accreditations in that time, and also completed Bachelor of Teaching. I kind of went into teaching because I liked coaching. But then towards the end of it, luckily got some opportunities to actually go into coaching as my job. So the next period, again, I was really lucky. As I was finishing my teaching degree, I got this call from Shannon Seabohm that had just been given the Flames head coach job. I actually thought it was an Ashton Kutcher. I was being punked. But he called me and asked, would I be interested in helping out with the Sydney Flames. He actually left a voicemail because I didn't answer the phone. I was in class at the time. I tried to call him back at lunch. He didn't answer. I tried to call him back in the afternoon. He didn't answer. Tried to call him back the next day. He didn't answer. Sent him a text the following day. And then I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe he changed his mind, whatever. And then about a week later, he called back and offered me a role as the assistant coach. And he said, I don't have much money. He had $5,000 in the budget for an assistant coach, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever when he said I could have $5,000 to coach basketball at that level and get to travel around with the team. And so I jumped at it and moved to Sydney and did casual teaching and some other things on the side to sort of get by. But that was a great opportunity and was very lucky. And the way that come about was just luck. Shannon's partner, Jamie, her mum was our team manager for the under-18 state teams. So a couple of nationals, Shannon had come in during the week and had helped with some scouting. So he'd seen me scout and seen me prepare stuff and we weren't really friends or anything like that before that. We didn't really know each other that well, but he'd just seen my work ethic there, and obviously my skill set fit the budget that he had, of not much. And yeah, I got the opportunity there. And then that started me to look at, well, I'm getting some great assistant coaching experience. I need some head coaching experience. And I applied for a couple of senior jobs, predominantly around the SEABL, and very luckily landed with Launceston Tornadoes as the head coach. And that was a great experience, and I will touch on that a bit more. But that was probably the best thing I ever did, was doing that. So I was doing 6 months with Sydney in summer and 6 months with Launceston in the winter. Yes, I've got the seasons around the wrong way. I should have done it the other way as far as temperature. But yeah, that was a great couple of years. Shannon then took the job with Basketball New South Wales, which then meant I needed to do something else. And just luckily on a road trip, I'd organised to meet up with Paul Goris, who just got the head coach job as University of Canberra Capitals back in 2016 on a SEABL road trip. And we had coffee. My sister was living in Canberra at the time. Just all worked out. He got the job. She lived there. I could live with her. And he needed an assistant coach. So I got to assist Paul for a year, which was awesome. And during that time, I completed my grad cert in sports coaching and started my Master of Ed sports coaching as well. But yeah, that was a great, almost 3-year period with great learning and a lot of where my lessons and skill set has come from. But I needed a real job and real money because they're all part-time, part-year roles. So I started looking for roles, and I'm very lucky to get the role here, player and coach development manager at what was at the time Werribee, and recently changed to Wyndham Basketball Association. And that's been great for me to get into Melbourne. It's been a great challenge. It's certainly a challenge going into association land, both in terms of changing levels. You know, it is a big adjustment, but also just in terms of managing the size and different things and the different personalities and the conflict and all the different things you got to do. And I've just been coaching teams, so it was a lot different. It's been great for my overall development. But I've also had some really good opportunities during this time as well. Coaching the Big V women team, and we're very lucky to win the championship last year. Loved coaching the state team. Hopefully we get a championship up for the end of the year. Hopefully there's something that comes of that, but that's been great. Coaching the Vic Metro team, being involved in 3 Oceania championships with the under-15s, and then twice with the under-17 women. Obviously only at Oceania level. I'd love to go to a Worlds one day, but anytime you get to represent your country, you're not going to complain. And I've been very lucky that Wyndham have been very supportive of all these opportunities as well. Involved with the NITP before the recent change to the high performance hubs. Completed the level 3 performance coach accreditation, and hopefully by the end of this year I'll have finished my masters finally. But for me, that's a snapshot of where I went, but I still got a long way to go, and I still see myself, I think it's my 11th or 12th year coaching, and 6th or 7th year trying to do it as a job. But I think the big part with it is, like, I still feel like I'm very much at the start of my journey, and I have a long way to go. But hopefully just going through that and understanding how that flowed will give you some context to where I got these 10 coaching ideas or thoughts to find your pathway from, which I'm about to go through. So first thing I think is that you can really do to help you is, and this has been touched on by Al and Dom, and we sort of know it. I'm not reinventing the wheel, but the thing that I think helped me was finding a good mentor early, and being around quality coaches. And Dom mentioned this in the Q&A, which was great because it really leads in. So I'm going to skip to the point, but you'll be a product of the people you're around, realistically. And I was just so lucky, and I'm not going to name them all because there's too many. And I'd miss people off. But I was around so many good coaches at a young age, through the state program, through my own association. There's some really good coaches from that region, and most of them are doing it as volunteers or find their way. But yeah, there's some great coaches there. So it doesn't have to be NBL coaches you're around, but just find a way to learn from great coaches. I think that's just such a key thing. If you get around those people, you're going to be a product of those people you're around. If you're around coaches that are arrogant, don't share ideas, they all think they know it all, I think it's hard to see you getting better and finding where you want to go. And then I've got Who's Your Old Man Kiwi. This is Eric Kiwi here, who not many people would know, but he was my mentor when I was going into the state program. He was a long-time state coach and really helped me in my journey. I think you've got to find someone like him. I think that they'll help advise and educate you. They'll tell you the truth when you're being an idiot. And he did a few times to me, told me to pull my head in or whatever it needed. But they also advocate for you, you know, and he definitely did that for me and helped me with some roles or pointed me in the right direction. And then the really cool part is since then, he's been able to follow my journey. And I give you one example of that. When I got the job in Launceston, he came down for a whole weekend, came to a training, came to a shoot around, and did the whole thing. And that was just a great experience. And I've still got a great friendship with Eric, and I still talk to him, not as much as I used to, but you know, if you find someone like that, that's a really good mentor, that's going to be a great starting point. And then just be around as many good coaches you can and learn off them. And that's going to be a good starting point to find your pathway and point you in the right direction. The next thing you got to do is sort of decide which path you want to take in coaching. And I've got the two little emojis. So firstly, you can want to work in basketball full time, which obviously there's limited roles, but if you decide you want to go down that path, that's a way you can look at it. Or you can be like a lot of people who want to work outside of basketball because of various things and coach on the side. And you can still coach at a really high level. I've put hobbyist coach, but I certainly don't mean that in a demeaning or anything like that way. But it's not their main thing that they're doing day to day. It's not their job. So I think with that, when you're deciding it, you got to weigh up what do you value. If you value a 9-to-5 job, if you value never having to move from your leafy suburb, wherever it may be, if you know, whatever those things are, then maybe going into it full time isn't for you. And I'll get to that a little bit more later on, but you've got to sort of weigh that up. I've got two coaches here, which we had on for the clinic number 6, Darren Perry and Dave Herbert, both current Australian under-19 head coaches. Herbie, he's a lifetime hooper, you know, worked in basketball, from my knowledge, probably his whole adult life. And then you've got DP. DP, obviously a great player, but predominantly has worked in basketball on the side. So his main roles of sort of his day jobs haven't been necessarily basketball jobs. And that's okay. They're both outstanding coaches. And even tonight, you know, I work in basketball full time. Dom's a teacher full time, you know, so he's still teaching and different things, but he's not in the sport. So there's nothing's worse or better than the others. You got to decide what's right for you. There's pros and cons in both. There's always, I think, people think if you go into work in sport full time, it's just always going to be fun. It's like anything. It's a job. It's going to become your job. So there's going to be things you don't like. And it will sometimes take things that were a hobby and really enjoyable and possibly make them a little bit more tedious. So you got to weigh that up. There's definitely pros and cons there. But I think at the end of the day, if I had one piece of advice when you're deciding which path you want to do, you got to back yourself. And I touch on my example here. I sat down with a high performance coach that was overseeing the program in New South Wales not long before I sort of got out of that and into WNBL and SEABL. And their recommendation to me and their advice to me was to get a teaching job and keep coaching on the side and just see where it is in, you know, 4 or 5 years time. And I heard that, I listened to that, but I basically thought I want to do the opposite of that. I want to go into this thing and find a way. So you got to back yourself and make a call and decide which path you want to go. And like I said, nothing's right or wrong, but it's got to be right for you. Number 3, you got to get your 10,000 hours of coaching reps. So we know the 10,000 hour rule of deliberate practice to get good at anything. Not great, not the best in the world, just good. Just have enough knowledge and understanding. And that's not just 10,000 hours, because there are people that coach domestic for 30 years, but they don't necessarily improve as a coach because they don't reflect and do all those things that Dom was talking about in his presentation. So, but I think one of the key things you got to do is you got to get on court as much as you can. If you want to find out where you want to be, it's going to help you decide what you like to do, which is important, which levels you like to coach, what you like to coach, what you like to do. Girls, boys, older people, younger people, whatever it may be. But if you get on court as much as you can in camps, individuals, programs, it's going to help you get better and it's going to help you understand where you want to be. But I think it's really important to understand that if you just do your 2 team trainings a week in your game, that's not enough. You know, what's that? Maybe 5 hours a week. I did the math, and hopefully my math is right, which it's often not. But in 10 years, if I want to have had my 10,000 hours up, it's about 21 hours a week if you're averaging 48 weeks of work of basketball. So 21 hours of coaching a week. And some of that will be your training plan. Some of that will be different things. And it's certainly not a set rule that you have to get to 10,000 hours. It's a guide more than anything. But I think you've got to get and find more reps. And this is where I think the problem is at the moment. And I sound like an old coach. I'm certainly not. But you got to balance the theory with the practice. And it's a hard time at the moment. And I'm facilitating a lot of the theory through these coaching clinics. But I think now more than ever, there's so much available online. So many podcasts, there's so many things, and certainly it's good to be well read and well versed in that. But you've got to balance that with practice and getting on court and getting those reps. Whereas I think sometimes coaches now, young coaches particularly, they watch heaps of YouTube, watch heaps of clinics, but they're still only doing their 2 practices a week in a game. It's not enough. You got to do more. You got to find camps, indies, programs, whatever you can coach in to get those coaching reps up. That's the one thing. And I was really lucky that basically my old man was going to the same things as well. And we just went to every camp we possibly could to learn and get better and see different things and just keep getting get towards that 10,000 hours. Definitely, you've got to seek head and assistant coach experience. I think you've got to have both. If you never assist anyone, you won't learn and see how it's done. If you're only ever an assistant though, you won't know what it's like to be in the hot seat. So definitely you've got to balance those head and assistant coach experiences. And then one key thing, I think, if you're a young coach or an upcoming coach, or even if you're an old coach, get into your state's high performance program as a coach. And that might start with, you've got to come and just help do whatever on the sideline until they, know they can trust you and respect you. But I think that's the number one thing you can do, because it's kind of what Al McCourtry spoke about last week. You got to get out of your club a little bit. Now, it doesn't mean you leave your club necessarily, but you got to get out of your club and get out of this, we're just trying to beat Knox every week, or we're just trying to beat Sunbury, or whatever it may be, and network and learn from those coaches. That's where you're going to build a network, and that's where you're going to be around other coaches. I think get into that state high performance program, learn from the high performance coaches, coach better athletes. But yeah, I think it's a great networking thing as well. So they're my recommendations, but you've got to get your 10,000 hours. Oh, I've gone too far. The other thing you got to do, and I certainly didn't understand this when I first started, the first years I coached, like I said, I barely won any games, but I thought I was good and I thought I was better than the other coaches and I was smarter than them, and clearly I wasn't. But you got to prove you can win and develop. And I certainly don't mean it's win at all costs or anything like that. But if you never put anything down on your CV that shows some success, and success can be player development, it can be players making teams, it can be players leaving your age group better. If you're a 14-4s coach, so they go to the 14-1s next year, that's good for you. That's proving you can develop. But eventually, if you want to progress in this thing and find a path into it to higher levels, you got to prove you can get something done. And you got to start to put some runs on the board and prove you can win and develop. And like I said, it's not at all costs, and it's certainly not just wins. But I think that was one thing, that I certainly had to learn as a young coach or a beginning coach. Next point, apply. And I'm talking about for coaching roles, I'm talking about for full-time jobs. I think sometimes people are too afraid to have a go. They don't apply for the state team because they may not be ready. They don't apply for a job that pops up because they don't know if they'll get it, or they don't know. Well, if you don't put in, you'll never, ever get it. And you'll never even get the experience of possibly interviewing or getting feedback on what you've got to do. So I think don't be afraid to have a go. One thing I've had so many coaches say to me is, you've had so many chances as a young coach. They don't know how many things I haven't got. I've missed out on way more things I've applied for that I haven't got than I have got. And I think that's really key to understand, is like, don't be afraid to have a go. And the next point is really key. Like, understand that life isn't fair. And I sort of touched on that at the start. With coaching, it's not always going to be, you think you've done all these steps, you're entitled to that next thing. That doesn't work that way. Sometimes someone will jump you. Sometimes someone will be an ex-player, whatever. It's going to happen at different times and for different reasons. You got to get on with it. You got to be resilient. You got to keep applying and keep working. And that's pretty straightforward, but I think it's really important advice to understand. And then the last couple of points, consider who do you want to work for. And I say this in terms of like if you're going into an assistant coach or development coach role, like who you might want to pair yourself with as a head coach, who you might want to learn off. But I also say it in terms of who your boss is. You know, if you go into the wrong situation in sport, in coaching, it can be really hard, and it can really diminish your love for the game, and it can could possibly also be the last job you have if it doesn't go well and it ends poorly. So consider who you want to work for, and I say find good people and a good place that wants you. They've got to want you. You know, you don't want them to just pick you because there was no one else left. You want them to actually genuinely believe in you and trust you. And I've got a couple of photos here, and I just want to touch on them really quickly. So here is Janie Finlay, who was the president of Launceston Tornadoes when I got the coaching job. And I remember the interview. It was a Skype thing or whatever it was at the time, back in late 2014. I had 2 interviews with them, one face-to-face with one board member in Sydney, and it went really well. And then we had a Skype interview with the whole board. And it was like a 2-hour meeting. But I left that just knowing that they were really good people, and it just felt good. And you could just tell it was going to be a good fit. And they were the two of the best years I had in coaching, and 2 of the best learning years I had. But I just knew there was a good fit. And then it was the same when I came to Werribee. When I interviewed with Werribee, the interview just fit. It just felt good. They were buying what I was selling, and vice versa. But I've been in other interviews and jobs I feel like I've wanted, or positions I wanted, and haven't had that same vibe. And sometimes that might just be it's not the right fit or whatever it may be. But generally that stuff will sort of work out. If it's the right fit, you get that good feel. But try and find good people. And I think, you know, I've got the photos here of Paul Jones, who's the president here at Wyndham. You know, Paul is an outstanding guy. And so is the rest of the executive, and same with Launceston. The board there was fantastic, but I just can't fit them all in. But Paul, for anyone who doesn't know him, long-time Victorian state coach, heavily involved in the Australian junior program, but great businessman and really passionate about the western suburbs and basketball out here. But he's just a great guy. He's a great guy. He's a smart guy. He's going to help you, but he just backs you in. And he's a guy you want to go to war for. He's a guy you want to work for. So trying to find somewhere where they're going to let you shape it how you want and back your vision, and not stifle or micromanage or whatever it might be in a negative way that's going to potentially harm your growth and development as a coach. It doesn't mean they let you do whatever you want. But the 2 places that I've been fairly recently where I've been the leader in some capacity in Launceston and Wyndham, they've just been, you know, good people in good places that want me and have allowed me to shape the program. So I think that's something you consider as well. But yeah, you've got to keep applying for roles, and don't think if you don't get something once that it's time to quit and throw in the towel. Number 6, move to Tassie. Do I mean literally move to Tassie? Maybe. It is a nice place, and there's good people there. But what I more mean is you got to get out of your comfort zone. If you want to be in basketball and you want to be in coaching, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone at different times. And that might mean if you're only ever coached 16 boys, that might mean you coach 18 girls, kind of like Dom was saying in his presentation. That really challenged his communication. That might be a way. It may be changing clubs. If you can't get into the senior program at your club and you've really tried and you've really done the right thing and it's just never, ever going to happen, you might have to consider that. I'm certainly not advocating for changing clubs because the grass isn't always greener. But sometimes you've got to be willing to make a move. And often I think in coaching, particularly if you're wanting to do it as a job, it may mean literally move state. It may mean move to the other side of Melbourne. It could mean you have to leave home or wherever it may be. So you have to consider that as well. But yeah, you've got to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. And that was certainly, like I said, the best thing I ever did was literally move to Tassie and coach. And and coach adults. I think coaching adults makes you so much more accountable. They challenge you so much more, but it makes you so much better because you've got to manage people. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to know your stuff. It's just such a good challenge. So I think for coaches, a lot of us sort of get more comfortable in a junior space because you can kind of just tell kids what to do, and most of the time they'll do it. I think it's a really good thing to consider. Even if it's as an assistant coach, even if it's just involved as a scout or helping out, just be around that will really be good for you. But also, it'll help you decide, do you want to be at that level? You might decide you want to go back to juniors. That's important as well. The other thing is with getting out of your comfort zone and maybe moving to somewhere else is you can see how it's done elsewhere. You get new ideas and experiences. As a boy from Maitland, and there were some good coaches in Maitland, I thought we had it pretty well set and this was a good way to do it and things like that. And I think it's now the same here in Vic Metro. People think that a lot of what we do is this is the way you get it done. And there is great success, don't get me wrong. But there is other ways you can do it. And there's other ways you can compete. Look at what Mark Radford's done in Tassie and made that a competitive program that's regularly finishing top 4, particularly in the boys' side. There's great coaches in other areas. So you can just see how things are done differently in different places. I think that really helps you, and it sort of ticks back to the thing I said at the start around you'll be a product of the people you're around. The other part with moving potentially to another club or another state or whatever it may be, it's going to give you a fresh start. And I think that's important. Like if I just stayed in Maitland forever, even if I got better as a coach, I'd still just be Reece that, started, as a junior at 8 years old and whatever, and was around the club and things like that. I was still Reece that got too many tech fouls as a junior player or whatever I was. I think it gives you a fresh start, and that moving to Tassie for me was that. It was a fresh start to shape what I was as a young up-and-coming coach. I was trying to crack the New South Wales state program as a head coach before that and couldn't get the opportunity. They thought I was too young. I got to go to Tassie as a 22-year-old and lead a SEABL team and make finals back-to-back years after the team had won 7 games out of 48 the previous 2. So I got a fresh start. I got to prove myself, and like I said, it was the best thing I ever did. So, yeah, moved to Tassie. Point 7, I'll keep this pretty short and sweet, but be prepared to eat a can of tuna and a pear for dinner. And I literally did that for about the first 2 months that I coached Launceston, partly because I was a terrible cook, but also it was pretty low on funds. Didn't have much additional income when I first went down there and went all in on the coaching front. So I did it pretty cheap for some meals. So that's nice pear and a bit of tuna for dinner for most days of the week. And then once a week, we get one of those $5 Domino's pizzas as my treat. So maybe I should go back on that diet because I was a lot thinner back then in 2015. So maybe I should reconsider that at the moment. But my point is, you got to be willing to coach for free to start. I think too many coaches, particularly in Sydney, in Melbourne, because there's school basketball, things like that will pay. They expect money straight away. You got to be willing to work for free and work your way up. Or work for very little money to start when you first get your coaching roles. Don't expect it to be comparative to what you might get in another industry. I think to start with, don't seek money, seek value. That's learning experiences, that's opportunities. You got to find a way to live. Don't get me wrong. But I think that the understanding and expectation that if you might make $75,000 in your job and then you want to go into coaching and you're going to go straight to that, it's just really unrealistic. It's really unrealistic. So you got to be ready to, basically, like I said, go on some the can of tuna and pear diet for a little bit potentially, and put the money aside, but find a way to live. Don't get me wrong. The other example is so Shannon Seaborn, when he got involved with the Kings to start with, he was basically a volunteer. And he did that for 2 or 3 years. He finished playing obviously with the heart condition and things, and hadn't sort of got into coaching there. But he worked basically for free to build up his opportunity. I think that if you want to get involved at WNBL or NBL level at some capacity, it's going to have to be for free for a while, or very little money. So just have that in the back of your mind as you're starting to find or decide on your pathway, what do you value? But I think that's something to consider. I'm on the home stretch, so stay with me, guys. Point 8, value learning and strive to keep getting better. So once you've done a bit, you can, as Dom sort of said, you can start to believe your own hype a little bit, and you can start to see those thumbs up signs and think you're pretty good. But you need to understand that you can keep getting better, and you need to keep getting better. And I've put Barry Barnes just to prompt me to talk about this guy over here, and hopefully most of you know who he is. Obviously, Australian Boomers head coach, 1996 and 2000, equal best finishes ever, 2 fourth-place finishes, which is awesome. Great effort, really successful coach, really well respected. My experience with Barry Barnes is when I was in Canberra, he was still coaching the junior program up there. We're at caps practice. I'm running some shooting drills at the start, and there's this old guy on the side, and he's there taking notes and things like this. And I look over, and it's Barry Barnes. And after practice, he's talking to Gory and myself and asking about drills we did, and he's still trying to get better. And he's a guy that's achieved as good as you could possibly have achieved, and he's still trying to, even at a later stage in his coaching career, he's still trying to get better and has that growth mindset. And I think that's crucial, and it was really inspiring for me to see that, and really eye-opening and some great perspective. The other point I've put is I think accreditation and formal education is increasingly important in the sport. I mean, I know Robbie Coulter at BV is pushing the accreditation more, and I think it's important that you tick those boxes as a coach. The other part is going to those accreditation courses, you get to meet people and other coaches and talk to them, and that's a learning opportunity, that's a networking opportunity. So tick that box and get that done. Formal education. Sean Page did a presentation for Jared Moore in Bath, New South Wales the other week, and I listened to it. It was great. And he said, basically, he had a couple of pieces of advice if you want to get into coaching in the US, as in the college system. And the first one was make sure you got a degree. And it's not huge in Australia yet for coaching roles that you have some form of qualification, but I think it will be more and more important over time, and particularly if you want to open up opportunities. But it's going to make you better. Certainly my study has helped me be a more well-rounded coach, administrator, and leader. Obviously, your informal education development must be ongoing. That's got to be daily, weekly, all the time. You've got to be trying to get better all the time, because you got to remember someone's ready to overtake you. And I put this photo here of Mason Rogers. And if you don't know Mason, he's our Youth League women's coach, and he's a great young coach who we've been lucky to have in our program for a number of years. And he's going to be a fantastic coach. And he's hungry, and he's trying to get better every day. And there's a lot of different Mason Rogers out there. And there's people that are older that are the same thing. And there's people that are trying to get better and be ready to overtake you if you stay and you stagnate. If you rest on your laurels and start to think you're good, Mason will take over you because he's working hard every day. So I think you've got to be ready for that. But, you've got to value learning and strive to keep getting better. Point 9, make sure you've got a strong support network. You've got to have your boy or girl. It can be girl as well. I just sort of generally say you've got to have your boy. But I think that's generally your assistant coach. But for me in Launceston, was my team manager as well, Jen. She was my go-to. I could confide stuff in her. I could rent frustration to her. I think it makes it a lot easier when you're coaching if you've got someone you're really tight with. It also makes it more fun. So I think that's important in coaching. And I was lucky to sort of be the right-hand man, or whatever you want to say, for Shannon and for Gory at times, and still really close with them. Lloyd, my assistant coach for the state teams, Corey, my assistant coach with Big V. Like, you got to have that person you can really trust. And generally speaking, I think like attracts like. Like, if you're a hard worker and you're really dedicated and you really value certain things, you're going to attract people that are like that, and you'll attract to people like that as well. Whereas if you're lazy and hopeless and just it's all talk, you'll probably be around those sort of people as well. So I would like to think I'm in that first part of that category that I just sort of rattled off. But I think head coaching is a lonely job, and that's why having a support network is really key. It's definitely that boy or girl assistant coach type role. It's also potentially your management. But it's also family, and I put my mum and dad there because they've been great to me, and without them, I wouldn't have been able to, take jobs that paid $5,000 to start with, and get an opportunity to now build to where, obviously it's my full-time role and work in sport full-time. But there's not many people that if you said to them once you finish your teaching degree, I want to move to Tasmania for basically next to no money and take a coaching job, that they would sort of back you and tell you to go do it. And they did. So I think you got to have a support network, and that could be your wife, like if your wife or partner or husband doesn't want to ever move or doesn't want to do something, it's going to be hard if you want to be a full-time coach and you're going to want to move and chase different roles. So thinking about that. But the main thing is, you got to have that support network. They will back you. They'll argue with you again. They'll tell you the truth, which is important. When I've got a tech foul and my mum text messages me after the game, says, "Stop being a dickhead, Reece," it kind of hits home. But more importantly, they get you through the tough times as well, because it's funny, particularly when I coach SEABL, but even big V level and things like that. Often after a win, you get a lot of messages. But after a loss, you sort of only get one or two, which is those people really close to you and that have your back. So they'll get you through those periods. But I think that's crucial when you're finding a pathway. It's a key thing to consider, is having that strong support network to help get you through. And my last point, and probably the biggest takeaway, is if you love the game, find a way to stay in the game. If you love the game, stay in the game. And I put the photo of Tex Winter. I knew Tex Winter was old. And we all know who he is, Phil Jackson's assistant coach, very famous for running the triangle. I knew he was old when he was in the NBA, but I didn't realize how old until I did some digging the other week. But Tex was still coaching the NBA at 86 years old. And 86 is really, really old. But clearly that guy was motivated and loved the game. And he was a pro coach at college or NBA level for 62 years straight. 62 years. And you talk about loving the game and staying in the game. I think there couldn't be a better example of it than Tex. And hopefully I can get 1/50th of the sort of longevity and success that he had. But yeah, if you love it, you got to find a way and stay in it. Make sure you don't compare. I think that's really key. Just because my journey seems really quick when I show it there, don't think that's where you've then got to be. Because in some ways I still think it's been slow at different times or whatever, which sounds ridiculous, but don't get caught in comparison and jealousy and different things at times. Like, run your own race, and if you love it, stay with it. Be patient, be resilient, be humble, stay hungry, and have fun. Remember, we coach the game and we're involved in the game because we enjoy it. So make sure you got this smile on your face, and I want to see this Reece more, because I probably don't do it enough, but and I think some people would say that as well. But make sure that you have fun and enjoy it, and you remember why you want to be in it. So just really quickly, I just want to summarise the points, and I certainly haven't presented as well as Dom or any of those guys. Mine is just very much like a Year 7 PowerPoint. So hopefully you guys are okay with that. But I think it's just really key. Remember, there's no defined pathway in coaching, particularly in Australia. So you've got to find your way. But here's some suggestions to help with that. Find a good mentor and be around great coaches. Decide what path you want to go. Work in basketball or work and then do basketball on the side. Get those 10,000 hours of coaching reps. Prove you can win and develop. Apply and keep applying for jobs in considered ways. Be willing to move and get out of your comfort zone. Make sure you don't go into it just for the money or worry too much about that. Be a lifelong learner, have a strong support network, and if you love the game, find a way to stay in the game. So there's also the photo of me after we won the national championship in 2018. I'd always sort of dreamt as a coach of winning a national championship. I did think it would be in a different shade of blue. I thought it would be with New South Wales, but obviously very much enjoyed that, and clearly too much, as you can tell from that photo. But yeah, it's if you love it, I think you got to find a way to stay in it. So that's it for me, Jack. So hopefully there was some stuff there for the coaches to consider. My ramblings and different things. Like I said, I'm not as well read as some of the other guys, but just a guy from Maitland that's trying to enjoy hoops.
Thank you, mate. Unbelievable. For young coaches, something really inspiring in terms of, getting to work in many different contexts. And for the older ones as well, the game of basketball is bright. Just a few questions here for you, mate. I guess, you sort of talked a lot about the jobs that you went through, but I'm sure that there's a few that you've missed along the way. Did you just want to share about the internal challenges of missing jobs that you thought you might have gotten, or managing those expectations?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, like I say, life's not fair and you're going to get one, but obviously there's some grieving period. You're going to be disappointed, and that's okay. You can't, I'm not saying don't be disheartened. Like it would be frustrating if you weren't disappointed, but don't let it get to you to a point. And certainly it's how you respond too. I think sometimes the first time someone doesn't get something, they think, well, I'm not going to put in again, or I'm not going to do this, or like, bugger them, I'm pulling out of this. Like, that's the worst thing you can do. And it goes back to my last point. If you love the game, stay in the game. And it's not easy, but I think that's probably the overarching thing for me is, be a little bit disappointed, but then just recalibrate, refocus, and get back on with it and understand that. And often what you miss out on, unless we're talking about full-time work, if we're talking about these, Oz gig or Vic gig, it's not your day-to-day. So remember to get back to that core, and like Mark Radford said in his talk, weeks ago, make where you're at the NBA. And I think that's really important. Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, that's excellent, mate. Question by Dom and Scott, I guess, talked a lot about the importance of, who you work for, or finding out who you want to work for. For a young coach, how do you go about working out maybe what coach fits or what program fits, and seeking out someone who's going to be valuable to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And this may not answer, but every time I've kind of gone and had a chat with someone or had an interview with someone and it's felt really good, it seemed to have worked out, and I've seemed to have got that job, or I've got on with them or whatever. It's really weird, because sometimes you can convince yourself that you want that job, or that you'll be able to work with that person or whatever, but you left that interview or that talk and it just didn't feel as good. Like, I've always felt like the people I've interviewed with, I've almost been all in with, straight after. It's kind of strange to say, but it's always just felt like the right fit. We're on, same values or same expectations. I'm probably not articulating it really well, but I guess that how you navigate that is make sure you've got good people to talk to. Like I said, have that mentor that you can call and say, hey, what do you know about these guys? Firstly, like, do your background check. Like I did that with Launceston, and I called some people who've been around, and they're like, they haven't been great the last couple of years, but historically they're a really great club. The community gets behind it. The board's generally pretty good, and it was like, yeah, let's go for it and make it happen. So, and same with Werribee. I mean, we knew it was a building club and things like that. We're certainly a long way from where we want to be, but just sort of, I think that's hopefully answers the question a little bit.
Awesome, mate. I think that's right. There's plenty of stories of people not doing their research and falling into jobs that maybe aren't meant for them. So, Great answer. From the King of Aussie Hoops, Jared Moore, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Wow. As a coach, my advice to myself would be calm down. I think as a coach, I've still got to work on this, but some people have seen me coach recently and still think, wow, what did it used to be like? But yeah, I used to coach, and at times still do, too angrily. And too, I used to think it was like an edge, like I'm going to be more demanding and tougher and that than any other coach, and that's going to be my edge. But really, it was my Achilles heel and weakness. And I think that that's the thing I've learned is basically I've got to be better at self-regulation, managing my emotions, my behaviours, how my body language is perceived. It's funny, I've been watching back some of our state games because from the last 2 years, from 2018, 2019, because obviously we don't have a championship at the moment and not many practice games to go off. But one of the things I've noticed is how many times I turn around and like something bad happened on the court, and then I basically spray the bench about it. They're not even on the court. They're thinking, well, I'm not in the game, coach. And I'm thinking, Reece, what are you doing, man? So I think you just got to self-reflect on that. But that's certainly one thing would be calm down, because it doesn't help.
Great advice.
Like a counselling session.
That's it. A few questions from young coaches. I guess you can often battle the image of being, perceived as just wait your time, or, you're not ready yet. Could you give any advice to those coaches about, being ambitious without being over the top, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. It's a hard one. It's a hard one because you've got to be ambitious and you've got to have a little bit of self-belief and almost, I don't want to say arrogance, but you've got to really think you can do it. If you don't, you probably never will, because you can be too humble. You can be too humble and you can wait too long, and what are you going to wait 30 years? Like, if you want to make it happen, you got to get in there and make it happen. And it's just balancing it, but it's definitely, like I said, even with the experience I had, where my advice from a really respected high performance coach and guy that I really listened to was basically the opposite of what I wanted to do. I listened to it, but then I just assessed and thought, no, I'm going to back myself and find a way. And it's certainly not easy, and I'm not. But yeah, if you've got that mentor that you can bounce those ideas off, I think that helps. And like I said, Eric was the guy I called. When I was like, Eric, like he was the guy I called, and I think that really helps you, because they got more life experience. I mean, you saw Eric; he's old. He's an old man, but he's a smart man, and he's been around the game, and he's been a teacher, and he gets stuff. So he was able to give a life perspective that me as a 21, 22-year-old didn't have. So yeah, definitely reach out to that mentor, but be confident. Just don't be an arsehole.
Last couple, mate. What were your biggest learnings? Maybe main one or two things from Gorry and Shannon in the WNBL.
From Shannon, it was almost like he was too optimistic. So when I got there with Shannon, he's like, no, we're going to win games. We're going to change the way the league's played. We're going to, we're going to full court press all the time. We're going to do this and we're going to win. And he just and I was looking at him thinking he was crazy, like a little bit. But he just sort of sold it, and it really changed my mindset, because before that I'd had a bit of success as a coach, but not a huge amount. And since then I've had a lot more, but because you just started to expect results from people and expect and believe that you can get that done. So yeah, I'd say almost like a over-the-top optimism and belief in your group and your team and your people that you can win and you can do well. That's one thing I got from Shannon. The other thing I get from Shannon is be a nice guy. Like, he's like one of the nicest people you could ever meet. And I'm far, like, just the way he comes across, like everyone likes him. I've got to work on that perception, because I've been described as like a shower. When you first get in, it seems a bit cold, and you're like, and then it warms up and you're all good. Which I thought was quite interesting. So I've got to work on that. But because I feel like I'm not like that, but maybe I am. But yeah, so that was from Shannon, sort of rambling. But from Gorry, I'll probably go on a more technical thing, because that might help coaches. Like, Gorry did shell drill every day. He just shell drill every single day, not the same exact thing, but he would have short, sharp bites of different defensive things out of shell every single day. And he just valued that immensely. And then his huge commitment to skill development. And that probably comes from his background at COE and AIS. But he was just so committed to skill sessions every day. It was just became a culture. And that were two things from Gorry, more on a tactical and technical point of view.
Excellent, mate. Last one. Coaches, I apologise if I didn't specifically address your question. This chat thing's harder than it looks. Reece makes it look easy. But Reece, how do you measure success for you as a coach?
It's, again, there's no one way to measure it, but I think predominantly people will think it's championships. Like, everyone wants to win championships, but it's more so what I've felt more successful for is when I've had players that I've coached go on to higher levels or get to where they want to achieve. So I'll give you an example, and I'm certainly not taking credit for these players, what they did, but Lauren Mansfield, when I coached her, she in 2015, she was out of WNBL. She hadn't been re-signed. She had a whole year before that where she wasn't in WNBL, and her whole thing when we recruited her back to Launceston was, I'll work you out every day. And we basically did that, and she got back into WNBL, went and played for Shane here with a club that's now defunct, but that really helped her as well. And then she went on and made Opals, and that was just awesome to see. And then more recently, Sarah Ellsworthy, she came over for us, again, uncontracted player, just a train-on player with WNBL, wanted to earn a full-time WNBL contract, and again, basically just worked every day in some capacity with her, challenged her, pushed her, encouraged her, built up her confidence, and she earned a full-time contract in Adelaide last season. So they're ways I measure it. I mean, it's always great when someone says to you and sends you a message at the end of the year that you were their favourite coach and things like that. I think, they probably say it to every coach, but things like that are probably more where I measure, those things, I guess, is probably more a sign of how successful I've been, particularly the levels. I mean, I'm not coaching in WNBL, I'm coaching that next tier down, so my job is to get players to that next level.
Great answer, mate. On behalf of all the coaches, thank you very much. Really just great example of getting to work and balancing that mix of, confidence and humility. Shout out to Mark Sampson, who had a quick nap on the camera there. We're always watching, mate. And I'll give it back to Reece to shut it down.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jack, for stepping in. Jace, could you just share that screen for me? Thank you, mate. I'll just quickly flag who we're going to have or what we're going to do next week. If it comes up. Yep, it's coming. Just bump to the next one, mate. There we go. One thing I found really valuable and got a lot of really positive feedback on was that the Q&A component's been really positive for all the coaches. So next week, we're going to run a Q&A panel basically for the whole thing. So what I need from you coaches is to send through your questions because I want to get them to the panel early. So please by Tuesday, so I can give them time to prepare. If they want to show video, they can be on technical, tactical, leadership, whatever. But we've got a great panel, really great panel. So Mick Downer, Canterbury Rams NZNBL head coach, but also heavily previously involved in the NBL as an assistant coach, been the World Uni Games head coach for Australia, outstanding coach educator as well, had a great opportunity to learn from Mick as part of the performance coach accreditation course. He's top notch, so he'll be great. Hannah Lowe from Sydney Flames and Diamond Valley NBL 1. She's going to bring that experience. Plus, she's been involved with state teams and as a grad assistant in college. So it'll be great to just get, again, a completely different perspective. And then the guy on the far side, I don't know whether a lot of people will know Tim, but Tim is he's like a basketball scientist. He's been in the NBL for a long time, back in the sort of 2000s. He was also a long-time Australian junior assistant coach, long-time New South Wales State coach. He's now currently director of coaching at Newcastle Basketball and Hunter Sports High School in Newcastle. Tim's a fantastic guy and you'll learn a lot. So make sure you tune in, send through your questions. Really looking forward to that next week. And again, just thanks for everyone just tuning in tonight and hopefully you got something out of it. And again, thanks to Jack and Dom and everyone that's helped out so far. It's been great. That's it. Thank you. Just hit leave meeting, bro. End meeting, sorry.